Welcome to The Landscape by George Smith Partners.
Hello and welcome to The Landscape. This is George Smith Partners podcast. My name is Evan Kinne. I'm the host, CEO of AXCS Capital, the parent company to George Smith Partners. Today, instead of my trusty co-host David Pascal, we have a very special guest. He's one of our employees at AXCS Capital, Mr. Eric Migicovsky. Eric, why don't you give a quick background? Who are you? What are you up to here at AXCS Capital? And we're going to dive into a really interesting discussion today on artificial intelligence.
Great. Thanks, Evan. Happy to be here. So my name is Eric Migicovsky, and I'm a director here at AXCS Capital, where I straddle both the investment side of the business and also our AI platform. And I ended up here. I had a startup focused on AI and using AI to help firms with their due diligence and underwriting, both acquisition groups and lenders, after a career in real estate finance, mostly here in LA for the last 15 years, and ended up selling that to AXCS Capital and joining the team here with Evan. And as I said, focused on the investment side and the tech side. So it's a really, I think, almost new and emerging kind of role, because I sit with our investment team and work on our tech platform and iterate very quickly on our in-house needs. So that's one side of what I work on. And then the other side is helping firms that are commercial real estate firms with their AI journey, everyone from they are just want to get Claude or ChatGPT and get a system going, all the way through to companies that are further down the curve, have systems, want perspective on how they're doing things and how they can really take advantage of the technology.
Yes, great. Well, it's good that you're here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. We'll try to keep it free flowing, but somewhat focused on real estate and what we're seeing real estate companies do to practically apply AI to actually, deliver insights and outcomes. I think there's been, some scrutiny lately in the news about the measurability of AI as it relates to output, et cetera. And I think here in this chat today, we can probably figure out some of that as well. So, there's been a recent discussion that sort of hit the news in the last couple of weeks. Maybe part of it was pushed by the All In podcast episode where they were talking about AI sovereignty. And AI sovereignty, for folks that are listening and may not understand what that is this kind of question about whether a company should be concerned about giving their data to a frontier lab. A frontier lab being a company like Anthropic or OpenAI, et cetera. I have some opinions here. Love to hear your opinion, Eric. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I listened to that All In podcast, and I thought it was really interesting. They spoke about a pharma company or defense companies and how they are partnering with these frontier labs, right? So it's Anthropic or OpenAI. And, I think for each business needs to ask itself, what is the core competency of the business, right? So for a pharma company, it's going to be their research, their existing, pills and drugs is the word I'm looking for, and especially the new research, right? And if they start handing over all that data and information to frontier labs, that is something that those companies can then do their own research on, right? So I think I agree with the view that there is a risk for those companies of handing over those kinds of crown jewels. Now, I think for real estate, it's a little bit different, because our data, we care about privacy and we care about data security, but a lease agreement or a rent roll isn't in and of itself something that is a core competency, let's say, to a new product that's going to come out and generate millions or billions of dollars of revenue. So I think we need to have a nuanced view in the industry of what is really core and needs to be secure versus what is actually needs to be really protected, if that makes sense.
So I guess to break down what you're saying, what we're specifically talking about is this idea that I give all my information into even a siloed, corridored window or whatever you call it with an Anthropic or an OpenAI. Then they take that information, maybe without you knowing, and use that information to build their model. Now, that would be obviously violations of the contracts.
Exactly. Yep.
But furthermore, we have, though, seen some recent significant lawsuits. I don't know all of them, but for sure, this has happened already where these frontier labs have definitely pushed the bounds, it appears, of copyright and contract law as it relates to using information. People have found proprietary data sucked up into these things. So it likely has happened. I think it's pretty unlikely that these guys would make a business practice out of that. But I kind of agree with you. I do think, though, that there is something to be said for owning your data. And in real estate, in our business, it's the relationships that really matter, not necessarily the data and information itself. That being said, with George Smith Partners, maybe you can comment on this. We have built our own pretty substantial applications. One of them is called AOS. On the AOS application, which runs under George Smith Partners, our view is that we're trying to create a real-time pulse as to where the debt and equity capital markets are and why. And that information is not in any LLM that's out there. It's built on actual conversations and actual deals that are in the marketplace at one point in time. And then we use AI to synthesize that data into something that's actionable for our capital markets advisors. So, with that, we would not want to lose that information into the LLMs because that's our edge. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, from my perspective, as companies are thinking about how they want to implement an AI strategy, I think there's a lot of the attention tends to be on, is data getting leaked? Which, by the way, to your point, would be a violation of Anthropic's terms of service, and I would think OpenAI's enterprise as well. So I think there's a lot of discussion around that, and I don't blame real estate people because this is real estate people and across other domains and industries are being forced to think like systems engineers of how do you build a system around AI, right? And it's everything from what divisions do you have, what are your workflows, what's a priority, and you need to map them all out and figure out what goes where and what that roadmap looks like, which is a different way of thinking about your tech systems internally. So with respect to what we're doing with AOS, for example, it's a great example of the structure around the data and also how you're using an LLM and an application to give us the insights that we're looking for. So a lot of the work to build AOS is unsexy in a certain way because it's making sure you have your data centralized in a schema that makes sense, in a way that you can call and update accordingly, and then adding an application and AI layer on top of that is really then where you get the power, right? So it's less about what is AI going to do in terms of is it going to take this data, but you can, once you have it set up, then you can get the kind of insights that you're looking for. And one other thing I would like to add is if we would say, this data and this analysis is so core to the value that we're providing, we can then, since we have the data and we control it and it's centralized, we can then say, let's use an open source model that we control or that we have, that we're running locally, rather. It's not leaving our ecosystem. So then the data never leaves the ecosystem. And you can get a lot out of these open source models. You don't always need to use the most powerful frontier model. So that's the way that we're developing our software with Claude Code, for example, but when it's actually run, it's local. A lot of it is on local models and data that we control.
Yep. And those models, let's talk a little bit about what an open source model is, just in case someone doesn't know. What is that?
Yeah. So, for example, when you send a query or a question to Claude or ChatGPT, it's sending it to its model in the data center somewhere and processing your request and giving you an answer, right? And there's the way that the models have, it's called weights. So all the different parameters that are connected. So we're in like the trillions of parameters, it's estimated that the frontier models are at. And those weights, which determines what those answers are proprietary. So
and the model weight, just to be crystal clear, if we were to sum it up, is basically the propensity of the model to anticipate the next bits of information in a sequence, right? And so someone tuning the model could adjust the model's quote weights unquote to push the outcome of what the model's giving you slightly one way or another. So
exactly,
okay.
Right. So like nobody can go and take OpenAI's model or Anthropic's model and say, I want to create a commercial real estate focused model or a construction model or a finance model or a pharma model, whatever it is, right? But with open source, there are companies, a lot of them now have tended to be Chinese companies actually that have the most effective and powerful open source models to date, at least. Those you could take and say, you could just use them off the shelf, or you can say, hey, we have all this data, we want to adjust the parameters and do some post training and to get that model to be a focused version for your industry, whatever you're trying to do. So that's I think curious to hear your stance on this, but I know that you think that that's going to becoming more and more common.
Yeah, I think also a big part of
it's
it's cost. So when you're like, for our business, we're finding more and more ways to run processes internally that don't require a huge amount of sophistication on the model side. They're more simple queries. Again, within our AOS application, I was just talking with some of the other members of the team there, and there are more and more consistent runs that we're trying to do to develop small nuances and insights out of conversations that are being logged in the system, et cetera. And those don't require, going out to a frontier model, right? And so running that internally drives down costs. These tokens are expensive. I think, it's my pretty strong view that much of the AI spend over the last few years has been wasted token spend of people trying to figure out what the heck they're doing. So, that's going away. I think companies are getting more and more scrupulous on how it's spent. And I think we're going to see a big push towards just owning that information internally. I guess creating some sort of, the right technical term for this, but a system that like adjudicates, which requests need to go to what type of model and so on and so forth. And even small shops like us, if you're not trying to figure out how to go that direction and, try to figure out how to use these tools, you're probably not doing what you need to do right now. Because people are, and then they'll just get farther and farther ahead. So what is, though, let's just like shift gears a tiny bit. Let's cut through all the fear, FUD, and FOMO and all that crap, and just what is you're a real estate professional, Eric. You've been doing this for 15 or 20 years. You understand how deals work, et cetera. What are like the most basic things that companies should be doing in the real estate space? And then what's like level 2, and then what's level 3?
It's a great question. I think level 1 is really, and I'm going to approach this from the transaction lens for a second, so either on acquisitions or financing. But I think level 1 is really taking a frontier app, if it's Claude or OpenAI, and start asking questions. Upload an OM, upload a T12, and ask for ad hoc analysis. And I know probably most people on this listening right now are probably already doing that, right? So that's kind of step number 1. Step number 2, and it's something that I've actually been doing a lot lately, as the context window has gone up to about 1 million tokens. You could really do this. So I'll take an entire deal folder. Let's say we're assessing a transaction, and I will just point the entire folder in Cowork to Claude, and then just have one long running conversation to try to understand the deal, to try to to really like dig in and brainstorm and use it as a thought partner. And I'll prompt 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, and keep going and going and going and going, and really just try to like learn as much as I can. It's like having a bunch of analysts work on a deal that come back to you with answers, but like you're just interacting with cowork like that, and it's building that context so that you build that context, right? And then you can go back and say, I want to dig into this issue or that issue, and then you can, spawn a different co-work session to dig into that. So I've been using that kind of like really big picture co-work folder perspective to try to just like get my head around deals I'm looking at.
Interesting.
That's level 2. I can go to level 3, but that's how I think about level 1 too. I think level 3 is really what we've been doing on the prop vetter side here. And that's a startup that we integrated here with AXCS. And that's building a custom system around different workflows. So in prop vetter now, we use it as our pipeline system, as our CRM, as our way of presenting deals and sharing it and presenting internally and externally. So it's hosted on its own server. It's its own custom software that we've developed here in-house. And that's really building out workflows and building out that entire system. And for example, like if you wanted to, and I've had this conversation with a lot of different groups, you could build ad hoc things within Claude. But let's say that you have a deal that you want to share with people and update, right? All of a sudden it's the question of like, where does that file live? Is it in the computer? Is it locally? Is it on the cloud? Is it how do you share permissions? Who accesses it, et cetera? So once you start getting around, need to collaborate on files and collaborate on deals, you really need a centralized store to host it somewhere. So to do that, in my view, it needs to be not all the time, but a lot of the times outside of the app. So that would be a custom, solution that takes, software engineering and development and a lot of work to build something that's robust and that actually works.
Interesting.
And it's I think one thing, coming from the real estate background and now getting more into software is that, what I didn't really realize or appreciate is that software is never done, right? You build something, you build an MVP, and you need to iterate on it. So, that's the benefit of today's environment where you can sit with the team and say, does this work? How does that work? We were literally talking yesterday about our presentation system, and they were saying it takes them, too long to do something. And I say, okay, great. Let's think about a way to fix that. And instead of it being, them talking to a third party or a vendor, it's I'm right here and I could spin it up and fix that problem within a day or in a week or however complicated it is. So that's like the kind of level 3, in my view, power of combining domain expertise and the power of these AI coding tools today that you can that even lay people can really start to play with themselves.
Yeah. And then also let's talk a little bit about a system of record. I think that's kind of what you're saying. We've taken prop vetter. Yes, it helps a lot on the analysis side, et cetera, but it's now we're using this on our AXCS investment side as a system of record. What does that mean?
Yeah, what it means is that like we have all of our deals, ones that we've looked at for 5 minutes and passed and said, that's not for us, all the way through here, the deals that we close and we're asset managing to through realization in a structured database that has all of our how we're looking at a deal, our underwriting, our market information, and everything associated with the deal. And once we have a system of record from that standpoint, then we can layer on additional intelligence on top of that when we look at new deals and say, okay, we looked at this deal in Denver and we liked it or we didn't like it, and here's why, and this is how it performed. And we can take that intelligence and integrate that into our system. So once it's a system of record, then it becomes really powerful on the perspective looking side as well.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit. What the heck is an agent and what do they do?
Yeah, it's also a great question. A lot of talk about agents was like 3 months ago or 6 months ago when everyone was spinning up their own open clause, which I did as well. I think the agent, from my perspective, how I would define it is it's an AI tool that has different things that they can do. And you give it a goal and you say, I want you to do X, and it could call on different, let's call it features, and iterate and implement and get to an end state where it has implemented that particular task, right? And I think going back to OpenClaw, it was really exciting, right? This idea of a general agent that can coordinate meetings for you or do research or, do a zillion different things. And then I think, I had an OpenClaw and it was actually like really hard to maintain because it broke a lot. It was actually like pretty technical in terms of how to interact with it. And it was also new. It was like 2 months old. So it was getting, it was still being improved on. So it ended up for me personally being not as efficient. And what I realized is, okay, like I'll give you one concrete example for when we're reaching out to people in terms of relationships to drive our business. We had an OpenClaw that we created to help us manage that process. And it ended up being pretty buggy. And then I realized, okay, why don't we just build a separate within our CRM? And we actually have this on AOS, an app that allows you to just click people's names and send them emails. And that way, like you're not relying on some agent that you think might go rogue and keep having to tweak it. This was pretty easy in saying, okay, here are the people that I want to reach out to. You send emails to them and you can create an agent to help you do that quicker. But yeah, it was a long-winded way of saying I think that the agentic, a lot of these workflows can be done in a more efficient and targeted way than using a general purpose agent.
And OpenClaw was like the aha moment, I think, when that really created the acceleration of revenues on a mass scale for Anthropic, right? And not to confuse OpenClaw with Claude and whatnot, but like almost hysterical where companies were rapidly trying to sign up and this and that. And yes, I think it kind of goes to our next sort of section here or thought process, which is, is the mass carnage going to show up in the numbers with respect to jobs? Particularly, let's focus on the real estate industry here. Like, what's your gut tell you?
Yeah, it's obviously hard to predict the future. I think that like the nature of work is really going to change, and we touched on this a little bit. But the other day, I had Claude Code running with 2 sub agents that were working on 2 different features. I had a deal I was looking at and had Cowork running something, and then I had a quick question I needed to ask, and I opened the browser to ask Claude something. And by the way, these were all on 3 different models, right? And that kind of like thinking about managing agents, and to me, like that's managing agents, right? Like it doesn't need to be some fancy like OpenClaw or something else, like because Claude itself is doing agentic work a lot of the time. So just like thinking about that and managing that is really a new kind of work that a lot of us are starting to do. And I think more and more people are going to do, and hopefully will increase productivity. So I'm seeing more of that. I think it might mean that like teams can grow their bottom line by having people do more of that rather than increasing a lot of headcount. But at the same time, it's interesting because like, I don't know, you saw this Ramp came out with this study where over the last year or two, they noticed that companies that were heavily using AI actually increased headcount by 10%. Hard to know exactly who's in that study, but it's just, it's a data point.
The Ramp cohort probably tends to be startup type companies that are growing. So
Agreed.
They're capturing customers there. They're not capturing a huge company. Okay, but what about like new entrants to the workplace in the real estate business? Like, what do you tell them? Like young guys, young folks.
Yeah. What I would say is get really good at. Well, it's 2 things, right? Like you want to be learning the fundamentals of whatever business that you're going into. So if it's real estate, you want to understand markets and underwriting and how we look at transactions and both the technical element of it, but also the relationship side of how to actually get deals done and how do people get deals done. So that's unchanged. But what has changed, I think, is how to go about getting that work done. A lot of it is still going to be checking and manual, et cetera. But like to the extent that people can really, and I'm talking to non-technical, I'm speaking of non-engineers here, can really like dig into these tools, have curiosity. I think that's the most important thing is have that curiosity, ask Claude or ChatGPT or whoever, how do I do this? What are different ways of doing this? How can I set this up? And you'll start to see, like maybe I should be trying some other kind of approach that strings different workflows or processes together, and maybe it doesn't go anywhere. And I've done this a lot. Like maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but you learn, oh, this is how I can build X, and then it's going to come back. And then once you have that like builder's mentality, then you can start really increasing your productivity and understanding how to manage different agents in today's work environment.
Interesting. So what would be your advice like to someone who's just getting out of school right now, looking for a job? What would you tell them to do with respect to AI, et cetera?
In real estate or just generally?
Real
or
estate,
both?
yeah. I mean,
in real estate? Yeah. Okay. First thing I would say is go work for a company, and this is a shameless plug for GSP and Access. Go work for a company that is really open to having the tool that has tools for you to use and has tokens, right? Like if you go to a company and all they have is a very limited version of Microsoft Copilot, you are going to learn a lot less than if you go to a company that has Claude, right? So like that's number one. Number two, I would say is how that company approaches and thinks about AI. Is it really something where it's fear or FOMO and there's a committee and they're talking about it, but they're not really doing as much, or actually like give people some rope of and leash of what to do? So that's important. And then a third thing, as I mentioned, is curiosity. Like if you have both of those and you're curious, you could really make an impact, and you could end up whatever you're doing. If you're on the underwriting side, you're closing a deal, you're in asset management, wherever you are, there will be something that comes up where you, after you're experimenting and you say, I think there's a more efficient way that we can do this or get to this answer or build something. You can show your team and the people above you who probably aren't as in AI as you are, and really wow them and say, hey, here's the power of what you can do. Here's an example. And then once that light bulb goes off, then they'll be even more encouraging of you to continue down that path. So that would be my advice.
And then what would you tell companies? I think you said this kind of at the beginning, but like you just mentioned it again. There's a lot of companies out there, particularly in real estate private equity space, that are sort of managing by committee and like freaking out about this. So what would you tell those companies?
I would say that their concerns around data security, privacy probably can be worked out. It probably can be worked out. I think a lot of what I've seen is, there's a fear in IT departments, frankly, where it's their job on the line if something happens, right? So there's a natural conservatism for IT departments to say, hey, let's put the brakes on this. Maybe it costs too much. Maybe we're not comfortable with how things are structured. But again, I think if companies educate themselves on these issues, they can get comfortable with them and ring fence certain things. So I'll give you one example, right? If there's an owner operator of multifamily who's concerned that their tenants' social security numbers and credit reports are just all going to get randomly uploaded to Claude, and there's a data security and privacy question, that's very valid, right? Like that's the kind of thing that you do not want to be uploaded, but that can be managed and mitigated, right? You can have that siloed for certain areas on that only certain people access, and there's other ways to get around that. So I think that to summarize, I would say is companies can probably get around these issues and start a pilot, right? Don't roll it out to a 500-person team or a 100-person team. Give it to 3 to 5 people, have them start playing with it, have them start showing what it's capable of. So you get comfortable with technology, you can get comfortable with the data security and privacy side, and then grow from there.
So is AI drinking our water?
I love this question because no, I don't think AI is consuming all of our water. This claim, by the way, then comes from a book that someone wrote about OpenAI, and then she actually retracted that statement because there was a math error. And I think there's more political ramifications from this whole sentiment. So no, I don't think AI is taking our water, but I do think there's going to be political issues that we're all going to have to deal with.
Yeah, but I think that generally speaking, what we're seeing is that the token cost per prompt and the efficiency of tokens are those two things are, materially improving so rapidly, it's almost unfathomable, right? So the just something to think about. And then also, I see here in the notes that I got here that say, golf courses use 17 billion gallons of water a year. Sorry, the AI uses that, but golf courses maybe up to 500 billion gallons a year in the U.S. So I guess
Should ban
every time
golf
you hit a
courses,
golf
Evan.
ball, you're using like 1,000 gallons of water. So, and also I think most of these new systems are all closed-ended systems, like recycling the water, et cetera. I'm not sure that this is really an issue. Look, I think, yeah.
I was going to say, and probably helps Elon Musk and SpaceX more than anybody else, right? Because if their whole plan is to launch satellites and data centers into space, it's gonna help him. So I'm not sure that's what. I
could be mistaken, but I don't think there's too many neighbors out there in space who can't have the data center in their backyard. So, All right. So look, some closing thoughts here. If I were to kind of sum up the conversation. AI is here to stay. Companies should be trying to figure out how to use it. We're using it heavily. We've built our own systems from the ground up. We're using it to develop software to run our business. I think my personal view is if you're not doing that, you're probably out of business in the next decade. I don't care what type of business you're in. That is the future. Lots of advice to young folks and old folks. I think anybody should be trying to figure out how to improve their output using this stuff. What else? What else, Eric? What am I missing in recap here?
I think one thing I would say is that, like, for companies that are still earlier, to just really try to get their heads around these apps and the issues around their potential issues around them, and start a pilot and just get curious about it and start using these apps internally is a way that you can start.
All right. So look, thanks for coming on today. Look, for everybody out there who's listening, Eric and I think, are both very accessible. People can reach out to you, Eric, directly. I think just want to tell them your email address, or
we'll put it in the notes also. It's Eric.Migicovsky at AXCScapital.com.
Yeah.
We'll try to put it in the notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the notes. No one's gonna be able to spell that. No offense.
Yeah.
And then of course, go to gspartners.com, sign up for FinFacts. Weekly newsletter comes out. We try to be very transparent with what we're seeing in the capital markets, and also in rates, etc. And happy to have you on here today, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Evan. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.